Hello, welcome to Wetpixel Live. My name's Adam Hanlon. I'm the editor of Wetpixel. I'm joined today by a regular contributor, Alex Mustard. Hi, Alex.
Hey, Adam.
You've been diving recently?
A little bit, but yeah, not as much as I need to be at home because my wife's got a lot of work on, and if I'm away, then we struggle a bit with looking after Isa. So
Yeah. Well, it's not being travelling when we build those big numbers of dives it means our options are limited.
I did, though, actually, where you say about, I did do my 100th dive of the year with you the other day. So
Fantastic.
that was nice. Yeah, so nice to get that. Normally, I wouldn't be that big a milestone, and it wouldn't be a summer milestone. It would be a spring milestone, but still nice to hit that landmark.
Absolutely. Yeah, good news. So what the topic we thought we'd discuss today was a fairly sort of basic topic in terms of the way we set our cameras, and that's how we use white balance and how we work with white balance. And I think it's quite important that before we kind of get underway with that we try and explain what white balance is, to really drop this back down to its basics. White balance is primarily to do with color. And obviously, your camera doesn't see colour in the same way as our eyes see it, although in actual fact, even individual eyes will see colour in different ways. We talk about people who are colour blind, and obviously that varies. So some people, what we see as red is not necessarily what someone else will see as red. And in many ways, that's the same.
Certainly not what your dog sees.
Well, absolutely, yeah, there you have it. But it's a good job we don't have to tell the dog to go and get the red thing, because then we get very confused, or it can't understand if we tell. So yes, so obviously red is a concept rather than absolute, and your camera takes this to its logical electromechanical extreme by saying it doesn't know what red is. It has no idea. So it has a settings within it which allow you to basically decide how the colors will appear when you press the shutter. And it defines those around this idea of white balance. There's a discussion that often surfaces on the Wetpixel forums about this, in that most people underwater will shoot in a RAW format. And the idea behind the RAW format is that it captures all the information in a given scene, and then we can then use that information in post-production, typically using Lightroom or Photoshop, to produce, to replicate the scene. So basically, as long as we have all the information, we can get the scene out of that information. And whilst that is to an extent correct, we still have to rely on the fact that we get the color balance correct in order for that information to be correct. If we don't capture that information correctly, then it won't allow it to white balance. So with that in mind, I think Alex and I differ a little bit on this, but Alex, how do you go about setting your white balance when you're shooting with strobes underwater?
So I typically, my first port of call is auto white balance.
Yeah.
And I do this because typically I take my underwater pictures with flash from very close to my subject. The foreground of the scene is flooded with the white light of my flash guns.
Yeah.
And my camera, using auto white balance, will look at that scene and give me a pretty accurate rendering of that scene.
Yeah.
And if I happen to be a little bit too far away, then my camera will probably compensate a little bit for that with auto white balance, and I might get a usable result. Now, it's not ideal to be a little bit too far away, but sometimes you are. If I'm way too far away, I'll end up with a blue picture, and I might have to white balance in post. But I like using the camera's auto white balance because it gives me a good working starting point to work from. And I have to say that these days in underwater photography, I process the majority of my underwater photos without changing the white balance.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty happy with how that auto works.
Yeah.
If underwater I feel my camera is getting very confused, and it can do sometimes with very unusual watercolors, for example, or where your subject matter has got very, very unusual colors and the camera is just struggling to find a good white balance and it's jumping around a lot between pictures, I will then go to a manually set white balance set using a Kelvin number on the camera, and I'll set that Kelvin number to the color temperature of my strobes or the diffusers I've got on them coming out. And that way you're basically saying, well, I know the white light I'm putting on this is, say, 5,000 Kelvin. I'm going to set my camera to 5,000 Kelvin. And actually the camera will just adjust often a little bit from that as well. And by using that, you're basically saying, I'm using this color light, therefore expect this color light and work with that. And that can be a good way around things. The problems come, and I know I'm going on from what you asked me, the problems come is that if we don't put enough light on our subjects, what then can happen if you're using auto mode in particular is the camera can then put loads and loads of warming into the picture, and we end up with a picture that kind of looks okay because we've underlit the subject, but the camera has compensated for us. But what it then tends to do is it tends to then suck a lot of the blue out of the background. And instead of getting a subject that really pops off a lovely rich blue background, you end up with a subject that doesn't pop off a not very blue background.
Yeah.
But the picture has kind of got the correct white balance. So I think one of the mistakes of not paying attention to the look of your pictures underwater is you can end up taking bad pictures propped up by the camera correcting for your mistakes. And I have to say that particularly my Olympus cameras are really good flatterers of bad photography. And they tend to, gloss up what they're showing you on the screen, and you think, oh, I'm doing everything perfectly. And actually, when you then download them, you realize you weren't doing it quite as well as you thought you were.
Yeah.
So I would say probably it would also vary a little bit between cameras. And on one of those cameras, I'd probably maybe stick a little bit more shooting a Kelvin number to make sure that I'm being very accurate with my amount of strobe I'm putting on things.
This is I think one of the other things about the strobe output itself. You mentioned matching Kelvin numbers. So generally, smaller strobes tend to put out quite a cold light. And this is very, very much generalization. So, and bigger strobes tend to put out a warmer light. So, therefore, bigger strobes have a lower Kelvin number, and smaller strobes have a higher Kelvin number. And typically, when we're trying to get those really deep blues in the background of blue water images, the way to do that is with a warm light, so a low Kelvin numbers. And there's a number of approaches to that we can do by modifying our strobes. Some, let's say, bigger strobes have lower Kelvin numbers. Smaller ones, you can actually adapt those by using diffusers that can warm the light output, or you can build filters out of gels that you can put behind diffusers. There's all sorts of ways of achieving this. But I think at that point, for me, certainly, what I do is I will always match my camera white balance Kelvin setting to the Kelvin setting that I think my strobes are putting out. And that way allows me to achieve a uniform color result. Now, the other thing...
I'll stop you at that point for a sec, Adam.
Yeah.
In that you have introduced a concept that I know a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah.
Because I wrote on Wetpixel actually the original article about it,
Yeah.
about this phenomenon which we discovered in the early days of digital. And it's been confusing people, not my article, but the principle ever since. People have been reading that article and various, articles that have come from it. And that is that your strobes can affect the color of the blue in the background of your picture.
Yeah.
And how that is possible.
Yeah.
And the reason that this is possible is that on a digital camera, the camera will always adjust the white balance and the look of the colors in your picture based on how that foreground looks.
Yeah.
And so if that foreground has a warm to yellowy color cast, the camera's white balance will take yellow out of the picture.
Yeah.
And when it takes yellow out of the foreground to make it neutral, it also takes yellow warmth out of the background blue. And that makes the blue, instead of greeny blue, because if you add yellow to blue, it goes green. If you take yellow out of blue, it becomes a richer, bluer blue.
Yeah.
So to get those, and that's how it works. So if you use a warm orangey yellow light on your foreground, what it will do is it will actually allow the camera to process the picture at a lower white balance, or your white balance. To get the correct looking foreground, you process the picture, or the camera processes the picture using a lower Kelvin number, a cooler white balance, and as a result, your background becomes cooler.
Yeah. And the argument that we've shot in RAW and therefore can post-process to achieve this effect is, I find, doesn't really work, because what happens when I post-process, it's a global shift. So I'm shifting all the whole spectrum in one or other direction, whichever direction the white balance correction is in, and therefore it will either suck the yellows out of the blue or it'll suck it out of the foreground. You can't do it globally. So this is why actually making sure that you get your colors correct at time of shooting is so important. And this is why. That's why
I think we have to be honest and say you can, in post-processing, selectively adjust the two colors relatively easily. But if you're getting it right in camera with the way you've got your strobe set up, it's then right in every single picture, and you're not having to spend 2 minutes tweaking one color this way and tweaking the other color that way, your pictures look great straight out of the can. So.
And I think, well, I was going to mention, I think that particularly Lightroom, but the Adobe family of editing software is increasing its capabilities in terms of selective color changing. So this may be a topic that needs revisiting at some point, but certainly for the moment, getting it right in camera is really important. So this idea that because we're editing in post and we can correct white balance in post, I'm still, and Alex is the same, convinced that we should get it right in camera rather than in post.
Well, I think for two reasons. One, it saves you the time of doing it afterwards, and it's a relatively small, easy thing to do that doesn't affect your shooting. You put those warmer diffusers on before you go in the water. It's not something that's taking your dive time up.
Yeah.
But secondly, shifting colors around in photos, I'm trying to think of a polite way of saying it, degrades your image quality. Few things make if you look at a picture at 100%, few things make the picture look worse at 100% than moving colors around.
Yeah.
Yes, the slider's there, but you can't use the slider for free. It does have consequences.
Yeah.
And so if you're pushing all those colors this way and that to make them look the way you want to, it's going to degrade your image quality. And if you actually just made a very simple change to your setup, you'd have it right to begin with.
Yeah. Yep, that's great. I mean, I think that's probably enough said about that, really. So Alex's article about what white balance color correction was on Wetpixel, but I think it's also on your website. Is it, Alex? You still got it?
No, it used to be on my website, but I want to change my website. It's no longer there. But it's called Strobes and Watercolor. Okay. It's a very old article. I did deal with it in my book.
Yeah. Again,
so this is the copy I use just for scribbling in and things. It's a while since I've read my book. But I know I reproduced a truncated version of that article in there. But it's relatively easy to find, and I know back in the day it was translated, I know, into lots of different languages as well. Yeah. There's lots of underwater photographers very interested in this being a new phenomenon.
I think probably if you Google something like Wetpixel, Alex Mustard, white balance, you'll probably get pretty close to it as well.
Yeah, Strobes and Watercolor was the name.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that, Alex. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Critics at Lembet. Please feel free to add any comments to this episode if you would like to suggest future topics. Please like the episode if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel to get notified when we have episodes in the future. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you soon.